Because the Republican Party is frequently accused of racism, some conservative pundits love to point out that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and he freed the slaves, while there were several prominent Democrats who were members of the KKK. This, they argue, shows that the Democratic Party is the party that is genuinely racist rather than the Republicans.
This kind of moral condemnation of slavery that you find in the founding disappears from America in the 19th century, and the Democratic Party becomes the explicit defender of slavery.
This, of course, ignores or denies the significant shift in both Republican and Democratic Party policies from 1948 through 1972. The Democratic Party transformed from the party of segregation to the party of desegregation, while the reverse was true of the Republican Party. Since Democrats started to become more popular with black folks, the Republicans decided that their strategy would be to cozy up to white racists in the hope of enticing them from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. This became known as the Southern Strategy. Nixon strategist Kevin Phillips explained the strategy thusly. The more Negroes who register as Democrats in the South, the sooner the negrophobe whites will quit the Democrats and become Republicans. That's where the votes are. Herb Klein, Nixon's press chief, covertly circulated Phillips's writings during the 1968 campaign. Joseph A. Astrup, in his book The Southern Strategy Revisited, explains the origins of the political realignment in the Democratic and Republican parties. Beginning in 1948, several major upheavals in Southern politics resulted in the gradual emergence of the Republican Party and the replacement of the one-party system with a competitive two-party system. The meaningful transformation started after Democratic President Harry S. Truman desegregated the military and the 1948 Democratic Convention accepted several pro-civil rights platform planks. Truman's and the Northern Democrats' actions caused Governor Strom Thurmond of South Carolina to lead the Dixiecrat Revolt. In 4 Southern states, the Thurmond-Dixiecrat ticket gained at least a plurality of the vote. This event was significant for 2 reasons. First, it was the initial split between Northerners and Southerners within the Democratic Party over the issue of race. Second, it was a harbinger of increasing numbers of Southern white voters supporting non-Democratic candidates for president. The Supreme Court played a vital role in this process with its rulings on 2 cases, Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, 1954, which struck down the separate but equal doctrine, and Baker v. Carr, 1962, which instituted the one-person, one-vote dictum. Throughout the 1950s, one of the targets of the tidal wave of Southern discontent about race was the Republican Party. It was a Republican Supreme Court that struck down the separate but equal doctrine, and it was Republican President Eisenhower who mobilized federal troops in Little Rock. All of these actions reinforced the carpetbagger Party of Lincoln image of the Republicans in the South. However, this Southern image of the Republican Party would soon transform into one more appealing to Southern whites. Beginning in 1962, the Southern Republicans began to openly accept a number of segregationist candidates under the party umbrella. The unhealed wounds between Northern and Southern Democrats from the 1948 election festered in 1964, when a democratically led Congress, prompted by a Democratic president from the South, pushed various civil rights reforms. The major goal of the Southern Strategy was to transform the Republicans' reputation as the party of Lincoln, Yankees, and carpetbaggers into the party that protects white interests. Thus, subtle segregationist threads are sewn into the tapestry of the Southern Strategy. As a response in part to the GOP's new image and the liberalizing changes in the National Democrats' policy positions, the Southern Democrats evolved from a party that depended on race-baiting white supremacists to a party that needs and depends on black support to win elections. Under the influence of Goldwater and his allies, the Republican National Committee's program Operation Dixie changed to openly promote more conservative states' rights and segregationist policies, made respectable showings in the 1962 South Carolina U.S. Senate elections. Even with the subtle change toward accepting candidates who were more in tune with the predominant white Southern Party at the time, it was not until the 1964 presidential campaign that the Republicans' new image became solidified. The key event that highlighted the Republicans' new strategy and led to the Democrats shedding their old segregationist image was the National Democrats' support of civil rights and Goldwater's and the Republican Party's support of states' rights. The battle was defined in the South as segregation versus desegregation. However, it was the Republicans, not the Democrats, who promoted segregational politics. Since 1964, blacks have become a vital segment of the Southern Democratic Coalition, and Southern whites have slowly migrated into the GOP. These days, honest Republicans acknowledge the Southern Strategy and have apologized for it. In 2005, the RNC chairman Ken Mehlman told the NAACP that after Democrats won over black voters in the 60s and 70s, some Republicans gave up on winning the African American vote, looking the other way and trying to benefit politically from racial polarization. I am here today as the Republican chairman to tell you we were wrong. Several of the more racist Democrats became Republicans. Jesse Helms was a racist Democrat in the 50s, but by 1972 he was a Republican Republican. Is this because he saw the error of his racist ways and decided to join the less racist Republicans? Nope. When he ran against Nick Galifianakis, uncle of Zach, his slogan was, "Jesse Helms, he's one of us," implying, of course, that a guy with the name Galifianakis couldn't possibly be. In 1964, Trent Lott was a Democrat. It was then that he opposed the desegregation of Dartmouth College and Duke University. By 1972, he decided that the Republican Party was a better fit for someone of his views. Albert Watson was a representative from South Carolina who became a Republican because of his views on segregation. Robert Byrd was one of the few former Klansmen who stayed a Democrat after the political shift because he deeply regretted getting involved with the KKK. He said, "The greatest mistake I ever made was joining the Ku Klux Klan." Dinesh D'Souza, however, does not believe that this policy switch between the parties ever really occurred.
But of course, the thrust of the progressive argument today is that we don't have to worry about all that, because in those days, Abraham Lincoln was actually a liberal. Abraham Lincoln was actually a progressive. He would have been a Democrat today. And in fact, the two parties have kind of switched sides. And this is actually worth considering for a moment. First of all, Abraham Lincoln never called himself a liberal, nor did he ever call himself a progressive, a term that actually came into currency only in the late 19th and early 20th century.
While the Republicans of the time didn't call themselves liberals or progressives, some championed a lot of the ideas that would today be called progressive. Karl Marx even worked as a reporter for the New York Tribune, a newspaper run by the Republican Horace Greeley. Some Republican officials of Lincoln's day even received the endorsement of Karl Marx. In the preface of Das Kapital, Marx wrote that Benjamin Wade, the Republican senator from Ohio and critic of capitalism, has declared in public meetings that after the abolition of slavery, a radical transformation in the existing relations of capital and landed property is on the agenda. Does that sound like something that would be on the agenda of any Republican today? Or does it sound like maybe the Republican Party attracted people with very different political views back then?
Did the parties swap sides? We hear that the racist Dixiecrats, who were seduced by Richard Nixon's Southern strategy, became Republicans. Both in my book and my movie, I put up a list of all the racist Dixiecrats on the screen. There's well over 100 of them, both in the House and the Senate. And then I start to count. How many of those racist Dixiecrats became Republicans? And the correct answer is precisely two. One in the House, Watson, Albert Watson, and one in the Senate, Strom Thurmond.
Dinesh is only counting the congressional Democrats who made the switch. Dinesh may be surprised to find out that the Democrats in Congress are not the only Democrats in the country. That's why his list does not include Jesse Helms or Trent Lott. And even if there were only two racists who became Republicans, why did they become Republicans if they hadn't been seduced by the Southern strategy? What is D'Souza's explanation for this?
And in fact, the whole notion that Nixon did this is completely preposterous for the simple reason that when Nixon became president, the first thing he did was he implemented America's first affirmative action program. It was called the Philadelphia Plan, implemented in 1969.
The Philadelphia Plan was originally devised in 1967 under LBJ. Nixon likely defended it because he saw it as a way to divide the Democratic Party by pitting black folks against blue-collar whites. As Terry H. Anderson says, Nixon's support for affirmative action and civil rights always had been tenuous and temporary, and was melting away long before the 1972 election. This was the election in which Nixon most aggressively applied the Southern strategy. He continues, a 1970 poll published in Time declared that Nixon had almost totally alienated blacks from government. While about 2/3 of blacks had looked to the federal government for leadership in racial affairs under JFK and LBJ, only 3% said the same about the Nixon administration. When unions who opposed the Philadelphia Plan began to support Nixon's misadventures in Vietnam, the Philadelphia Plan was quickly abandoned. As Anderson says, with increasing union support and none from African Americans, Nixon moved away from his own affirmative action policy. As aide William Safire recalled of the Philadelphia Plan, the zip went out of that integration effort after the hard hats marched in support of Nixon on the war. The administration decreased pressure on unions and gave more support to voluntary hometown plans. The Nixon administration is destroying the Philadelphia Plan plan declared the NAACP's Herbert Hill, which was a payoff to the building trades unions for their support of the war in Indochina. The plans were a fraud, he continued, a meaningless hodgepodge of quackery and deception, of double talk and doublethink. This quackery and deception that Nixon foisted upon black Americans is Dinesh's idea of evidence that the guy was not racist.
So the whole notion of Nixon's Southern strategy is bogus. Fake history.
So why did Herb Klein circulate the writings about taking advantage of negrophobe whites during the 1968 campaign? Why did Strom Thurmond switch parties? What did Ken Mellman apologize for? And if the Democratic Party is the more racist party, how does Dinesh explain the polling data that seems to indicate the opposite? In 2017, Pew did a poll asking whether more people of different races marrying each other is generally a good thing, a bad thing, or doesn't make a difference. Only 6% of Democrats, or people who said they lean Democrat, said it was a bad thing. 12% of Republicans, or people who lean Republican, said it was a bad thing. If the Republicans are the less racist party, why are the Republicans twice as likely as Democrats to hold this racist view?